Welcome back, one and all, to our Innovators Spotlight in the MedTech Empire State Biomed Focus 22 series. As we look at innovators in Central New York and the Mohawk Valley, I'm pleased to be joined now by Souvik Paul, who is the CEO and founder of Aurie. Souvik, it's nice to have you here. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So, Souvik, I'm wondering if you can start off in the way that we start these conversations. Talk to us a bit about the problem that you identified.
Sure. So the broad area that we're focused on is urinary health for people living with complex physical disabilities like spinal cord injury, spina bifida, and multiple sclerosis. And basically, in the medical supply space, you essentially get what you pay for with today's current single-use paradigm. So people with these conditions need to use between 6 and 8 single-use intermittent catheters every day to urinate. And the types of catheters that people are commonly covered for by insurance also lead to a really high annual infection rate of around 50%. And these infections worsen over time, they're difficult to diagnose and treat, and they're a leading cause of death for people living with spinal cord injury. There are safer catheters on the market that reduce infection rates, but they're so expensive as single-use products that insurers cover them for less than 10% of users that need to use intermittent catheters. So what we're doing is we're building a ecosystem that bridges medical devices and digital health to help improve people's urinary health. And our proprietary hardware is a reusable no-touch intermittent catheter system that allows us to basically change the economic model around providing these higher quality catheters that reduce infections, and in doing so, reduce costs for payers as well, and improve urinary health for our users.
So, tell me if you can, I suppose, without revealing all of the secret sauce, how did you overcome that economic barrier?
Well, the key is really using or developing a way to help people safely and automatically reuse their catheters when they're out and about, whether they're at work, whether they're at home or in the community. So it comes down to a piece of hardware that we've developed that helps to completely automate that entire process so that it's safe for the end user. And that then allows us to amortize the cost of production over multiple uses and arrive at a lower net cost for payers.
And where does the digital health component come into play?
So, I think these days it's short-sighted if you think about medical devices just being a standalone device, especially when there are consumers involved. And one thing that's unique about the intermittent catheter space is that end users are what you would call patients who are inserting and using these catheters themselves. So the digital health components of the business really revolve around streamlining connections and access to care. So we're connecting users with physicians using telemedicine on an on-demand basis. And then because infections are so common amongst catheter users, we're also providing them with the ability to gather urine cultures at home and send them off to labs for testing, and the ability to actually prescribe antibiotics and send them directly to the user's home instead of going through that really friction-filled and convoluted process of needing to book appointments and having to go into the doctor's office or the lab testing facility in person, which ultimately ends up adding days to proper diagnosis and treatment.
Let's talk a little bit about you, Souvik. Help me explain, if you will, your journey as an entrepreneur, your background. What is it that brings you to this space today?
Well, so my training is in industrial design. I went to the School of Visual Arts in New York City to get my MFA in industrial design. And prior to that, I was working in finance as a trader for JP Morgan. And my general motivation for going to graduate school was to design physical products that could help improve people's lives. And 2 weeks before I started grad school, my future sister-in-law was in a car accident and sustained a spinal cord injury. So I ended up focusing a lot of my time in graduate school, obsessed with this idea or this question of how can I use design as a capability to help improve my family members' quality of life and independence. Following graduate school, I worked at Johnson and Johnson, and I think that was really eye-opening from the perspective of really understanding what incumbents in the medical device space do and don't do really well. So the perspective that I came to is that an organization like J&J is innovative. They help to really scale impact when they have a proven business model where product market fit is established for things like medical devices or digital health ecosystems. What a J&J does less of is actually try to prove out new business models themselves. They're much more in the mode of, once something is proven, we'll acquire it, we'll help it scale. So then I realized that, it's really down to the entrepreneur who has the new idea to prove out that idea as best as possible to actually start to commercialize it. And that's how significantly new innovations are introduced into markets like medical devices. And that, having come to that realization, I decided to sort of take the plunge and start Aurie and try to make some of the ideas that I had come up with in graduate school a reality because I really believed in their potential to help people.
And you've also, I know, assembled a talented team of professionals that you're working with. Can you talk a little bit about how you found that team, what you were looking for, kind of what the philosophy is for you and your team members?
Yeah, I think the unifying cultural philosophy that we have at Aurie is, we treat our end users as people, not patients. And we also recognize that there isn't, there needs to be an integration of what the end user's experience is in developing products for the community. So we really pride ourselves on continuing to invest in user interviews, surveys, basically just trying to get in front of users whenever possible to get feedback on what we're building and to actively incorporate their voice into the product design development and even the commercialization design and development. And members of my team have taken this to such an extent that several of us have actually catheterized ourselves, even though we don't have a clinical need to do it, just to understand with more empathy what do our users have to do on a daily basis and how do we actually improve that workflow for them. So we take that user centricity incredibly seriously at Aurie.
So you said something that's really kind of caught my ear, and that is the centrality, if you will, of the patient experience to your product development. And I guess I'm curious to know, so much time spent in the medical device development phase is really focused on reimbursement, right? Who's going to pay for the product? How can we develop a product that's going to be accepted in the market and reimbursed by insurance and others? Where does well, let me say this. I can imagine that the patient experience could easily get lost in that space. How do you help integrate those two demands?
Yeah, so I mean, I think they feel at the same time as feeling separate, they also feel very intertwined with each other because I think a big part of what we're trying to do is increase access to higher quality products that help people avoid infections. And the way that you do that is by really thinking through how does this get reimbursed? How do we make sure that the barriers that currently exist today to people getting safer products like no-touch catheters don't apply to our product? And so in many ways, it's separate because there are different stakeholders involved, but at the same time, they're just so integral to each other that for us, a big part of our approach in terms of building a reusable no-touch catheter system is informed by that really critical reimbursement piece and how do we actually sell this device in a sustainable way to our end users without increasing costs for payers, because we know that that's going to be a really big barrier to market adoption and widespread reimbursement. So that they've kind of consistently been part of the overall vision for the company and how we actually got started in terms of really trying to think through how do we navigate and utilize the existing codes in order to get reimbursed for the system.
And tell me, if you can, about the company. Where do you see Aurie in the next 2, 3, 5, 10 years? What's your vision for the company?
Yeah, so we are planning to launch commercially next year, both in terms of the telehealth components of the system as well as getting FDA approval for our device. And we've been designated a safer technology by the FDA, so we've really enjoyed a close working relationship with the FDA, which has really helped to facilitate and expedite our development process. From there, we want to initially create a foothold in the urinary catheter market with our proprietary system. We think that there are opportunities to expand into adjacent spaces like the ostomy supply market, like wound and skin care from a more clinical perspective. And then to also look at, what are some of the other products and tools that people living with complex physical disabilities use in their daily life, because we think that's where we make the most impact, is by actively partnering with the community in order to understand what are some of the fringe practices and behaviors that people are taking on today because they're forced to, because sometimes, incentives don't align in the current ecosystem. And how do we kind of extrapolate those behaviors and create sustainable products and ecosystems out of what, a small percentage of our users are currently doing today. Beyond that, leaning into more of the digital health components of the business, I think the challenge for a lot of people living with spinal cord injury, as an example, is that there are clinical centers of excellence for the treatment of spinal cord injury, but what do you do as an individual if you don't happen to live in Colorado, where Craig Hospital is, or if you don't live in Atlanta, Georgia, where the Shepherd Center is? I think one of the really exciting things about digital health is we can start to build a core community of clinicians and healthcare professionals who specifically focus on conditions like spinal cord injury, and just really dramatically increase access to that high level of care, regardless of where a person happens to be geographically.
And you've talked about kind of the network approach to patient care. I'd like to switch the focus just a little bit to perhaps a network approach to getting a business started. We here at MedTech feel very strongly about the power of collaboration and connection to the ecosphere. I'm wondering if there were particular connections or collaborations along the way that have been meaningful and important to you.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think getting funding and support for an early stage medical device company is just incredibly difficult. I think that the ecosystem and universe of investors have kind of moved further and further downstream, where I think most of the investors in the space are typically interested in either post-regulatory or very close to post-regulatory approval companies. And so the ecosystem, especially around Syracuse, has been so incredibly helpful in terms of helping us get started, helping us connect to resources. Being part of the Central New York Biotech Accelerator was amazing. I mean, partnering with Kathy on just the Medical Device Innovation Challenge, the year that we participated in that program, and getting connected to mentors all the way through, applying to grants from FuseHub and winning a manufacturing grant from FuseHub and a commercialization competition award from FuseHub. Those have been really impactful parts of the ecosystem for us to be able to tap into, just because, things can be pretty sparse when it comes to funding opportunities for early stage medical device companies.
And before we wrap up, I'm curious to know what's next on your agenda. If we could, in this message, help kind of deliver a word of what you're looking for, what would that be?
I think consistent with my answer to the last question, funding is always something that we're trying to get connected to. So we're in the process of raising a $6 million seed raise. We have around 50% of that soft circled from existing investors, but we're really looking for experienced digital health or medical device investors to lead the round and to join our board so that they can help us with our strategy, especially over these next 9 to 12 months, which are going to be really critical, because that's when we start generating revenue and actually submit to the FDA.
So for our audience members, those who are interested in learning more about Souvik and his work at Aurie, And certainly for those of you who may be interested in investing, I encourage you to jump over to their website, which is livewithaurie, AURIE.com, and to connect with Sovic Paul and his team. They're doing amazing work in this space. Sovic, as always, it was nice talking with you. I enjoyed our time together, and wish you all continued success. Thanks so much.
Thank you.